Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is bargain. And before we look at definitions, I want to make a small note about the pronunciation of this verb. So, in one of my classes, we've been studying long A pronunciation and looking at spelling patterns that produce that sound. And so we see an AI here, but we don't make a long A sound in the second syllable. We're actually making a short I sound when we say this word bargain. Bargain. Okay. So now that we feel more confident about the pronunciation of this verb, let's talk about how to use it. One way people use the verb bargain is to mean to negotiate the terms and conditions of a transaction. Right? So this is where one side suggests or offers one thing, and another side says, "What about this?" Or "I'll give you X for something more." Right? And it's kind of that idea of going back and forth as you come to your agreement. And that's the second way to use this verb. We can use bargain to describe the action of agreeing and coming to terms. You should know that bargain is a regular verb. To make the progressive form of this verb, all you need to do is add ing to form bargaining. The past tense and participle forms of this verb can be made by adding ed. Our base verb, bargain, ends in a voiced end sound. This means the ed ending is just going to make a d sound, and we're not going to add an extra syllable as we say it. It should sound like this: bargained, bargained. Okay? Now, today we're going to spend time looking at phrasal verbs because there are a number associated with this particular verb. And the first phrasal verb we'll discuss is to bargain away. One way to use this phrasal verb is to mean to lose or to give up something as part of a negotiation or a negotiated agreement. Right? An example of this might be union employees can't bargain away their pay for required travel time. So here I've got the modal can, and actually it's negative in this sentence. And what I'm suggesting in this sentence is they do not have permission to give up this particular benefit. There are rules or there's a law that does not allow them to make that part of the negotiation. A second way you can use bargain away is related. So it's that idea of losing something, but this time you're losing something really important, maybe a freedom, a right, and it feels like you're getting very little in return as part of that agreement. Let's look at an example sentence. Have prosecutors bargained away some charges in order to secure a guilty plea on other charges? So the beginning of this, have prosecutors bargained away? That's an example of the present perfect. You might be kind of wondering about the meaning here, but what this sentence is describing is this idea that many people get charged with crimes, but very few people actually have a trial. So, in the United States, there's this process where prosecutors and defense attorneys they talk, they negotiate. Someone might be charged with many, many, many crimes, and maybe the person agrees to say they are guilty to something that is not so severe, so they are serving less time in prison. But both sides look at this and think this can be a bad idea. There are people who will say they are guilty even though they weren't at the place, just because it seems like it's going to take a really long time, or it doesn't seem like they have a good chance if they go to court. There are other people that look at what prosecutors are doing and they think, oh, no, 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 we're letting people who did really serious things not serve time in prison, and that's not good. Right? So, um, maybe depending on your personal beliefs, you might have thoughts on which side is losing something more important than the other. A second phrasal verb you might encounter is to bargain for. This can also have a couple different meanings. One would be to attempt to obtain possession of someone or something after negotiating. An example of this: can we bargain for that used car? This is an example where somebody is maybe asking for permission, right? Maybe there's a stated sales price, but kind of want to know, can we talk about it? Can I try and buy this after we consider some other options for the price? Another way to use bargain for is to talk about expecting or anticipating something. Let's look at an example sentence. We got more than we bargained for when we agreed to house sit for the weekend. Okay, so maybe I'm talking about my spouse and I. We agreed to stay at someone's house, water their plants, take care of a few other things while they were traveling. Right? And while we were staying there, there was a big storm. A tree fell on the house, right? And it was far more complicated, far more difficult than we expected or we anticipated. That's where you might hear a phrase like, we got more than we bargained for. Again, really common for that to mean to expect or anticipate. The next phrasal verb we'll discuss is to bargain on. This can also have a couple different meanings, and one will be that idea of expecting or anticipating or planning on something or some situation. An example of this: I didn't bargain on having to do so much pre-work when I volunteered to help out with the event. So here, maybe I had agreed to help a nonprofit with a fundraising event, and I think, okay, I'm going to volunteer from 6 until 9. But then I start getting asked to do more prior to that evening, prior to 6 p.m. So here, I didn't expect it, I didn't anticipate it. That's another example of the simple past tense. Another way to use bargain on can mean to rely or depend on someone. An example of this: you can't bargain on a teen babysitter being able to work every weekend. I heard a sentence very similar to this. A set of parents have a situation where one parent really needs to be at work for several weekends in a row. Just a very busy time for them. And this parent was sort of expecting or relying that their neighborhood teen babysitter could watch their children every Saturday. And the other spouse was going, no, 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 that person has activities. They want to be social. They want to be with their friends. They're not going to work all day every weekend for 2 months. The last phrasal verb we'll talk about today is to bargain with. An example of this might be to attempt to obtain possession or custody of someone or something after a negotiation. An example of this: the company has bargained with the union over the amount of annual paid time off. You might have noticed here, has bargained with is another present perfect sentence, and it's specifically referencing this idea of companies negotiating with unions. So if you follow labor news or maybe you work in that area, this is a verb I think you'll hear and see quite often, this idea of going sort of back and forth and trying to reach an agreement. Now, let's spend a moment looking at some words that are related to our verb bargain. And the first word we'll discuss today is the noun bargain. So, same spelling, same pronunciation. When we use bargain as a noun, we can refer to the agreement that's been made among two or more parties as to what each party is going to do for the other. An example of this: we're going to keep our part of the bargain. Okay? So with a sentence like this, it sounds to me like there was some type of agreement, right? And maybe one side isn't really doing what they agreed, but the other is still saying, okay, we're still going to follow through. We're going to keep our promise and continue on. A second, and to me, something I hear far more common with the noun bargain, is to refer to something that's being offered for sale much more cheaply than what is normal or maybe than what is expected. So for this definition, I want you to pretend you're out shopping, you see a pair of shoes that you just think it's great, you look at the price and you're like, wow, this is a good deal. right? So you might say, these shoes are such a bargain, right? Great price. I have to have them. Another related word you might hear is the adjective bargain basement. You might hear this to refer to something that's inexpensive. It might also be used to talk about something that's cheap, but that is also of not so great quality, inferior quality, less than sort of what is expected. An example of this is this a bargain basement stock right now? So sometimes you'll hear this used to describe stocks that are being sold for very little amounts of money at the present time. Others might also look at it and think, the stock is probably not going to make us a lot of money going forward. I think it's inferior. So might have to ask some follow-up questions if you hear someone use that adjective to better understand. Is it that they think it's inexpensive, or do they think the quality is not so good? Another related noun you might encounter is bargaining chip. Okay. Now, I know many times when we think of chip, right, we're thinking of something small, a piece of something else. But here, this is not something we can actually see most of the time, but it's something that's being used to try and gain an advantage as you are negotiating or as you're trying to reach an agreement. An example of this: the threat of a strike is the best bargaining chip we have. Okay. So, again, sometimes when we're talking about disagreements in the area of labor, so between companies and groups of workers, right? If the workers are threatening to strike, sometimes that makes companies go like, "Oh, I don't think we can deal with not having workers to produce whatever it is we make or to provide whatever services we need to provide." The last word we'll look at today is the noun plea bargain. This is going to go back to one of those earlier examples where we were talking about prosecutors and defense attorneys. So, a plea bargain is that negotiation of an agreement between a prosecutor and a defendant where the defendant says, I'm going to plead guilty. I'm going to say, I'm guilty, but I'm going to say it to a lesser charge or a reduced charge. So something that is considered less serious or that requires less punishment, maybe less time in prison. An example of this might be over 90% of federal criminal cases end with a plea bargain. And I think that is a true statement for the United States. It might be different in other countries. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.